A simple conversation with a homeless man made me realize that I was living a lie. The aroma of roasted chicken mingled with the sweet scent of the flowers adorning the table. The dining room at the Mendez house was illuminated by a setting sun streaming through the large windows, creating a warm and inviting atmosphere. However, for Edward, the warmth was not enough to melt the tension building in his chest. He sat at the table, between his mother, Amelia, and his father, James, both eager to discuss his achievements and, once again, his career. "Edward, did you see how Jack stood out in the last campaign? He's a prime example of success," Amelia exclaimed, her eyes shining as she spoke about Edward's colleague. "I always say you should take inspiration from him. Look, he's already being considered for a promotion." Edward forced a smile and shoved a piece of chicken into his mouth, trying to chew while his mind rebelled against the expectations. "Yes, Mom, I saw. He's really doing well. You know your advertising field is very competitive, right?" Amelia continued, oblivious to her son's discomfort. "I just want you to succeed. You need to show the world what you can do." Edward felt a knot forming in his throat. The pressure was suffocating. He glanced at his father, who maintained a serious expression, as if expecting something more from his son. James, always the pragmatic one, had never been one for praise. For him, success was measured in numbers, titles, and prestige. "What are you doing to stand out, Edward? You need to think about your future. What truly matters is recognition, financial return," James said, his voice firm. "But what if I'm not happy with that?" Edward murmured, his voice barely audible. He felt small, as if he were battling against a strong wind that wouldn't let him move forward. "It's not about happiness, son. It's about responsibility. You have immense potential, and you can't let that slip away," Amelia insisted, her tone a mix of concern and determination. "You need to be like Jack, have his ambition." The conversation grew increasingly heavy, and Edward decided he could no longer bear it. "Mom, Dad, I really appreciate your concern, but I'm not Jack. I don't want to be like him. What I want is something different," he said, trying to keep calm, but irritation began to seep into his voice. Amelia looked at him disapprovingly. "Different how? You want to give up everything? Abandon your career? That doesn't make sense. That's not what I'm saying. I just want to make sure I'm following my path, not someone else's," Edward replied, frustration rising in his tone. "So what is your path, Edward? What do you really want from life?" James questioned, now in a softer but still demanding tone. Edward hesitated. What did he really want? The question echoed in his mind, but he had no answer. He felt trapped in a whirlwind of expectations and obligations that left him distressed. I don't know yet," he confessed, his voice faltering. "I just know I'm not happy." The tension at the table escalated, and Edward felt he was about to explode. He stood up abruptly, leaving his plate untouched. "Sorry, I need some time," he said before retreating to his room. Once there, he threw himself onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. He picked up his phone and saw messages from Emily, his girlfriend, about a social event she was organizing. Her words were filled with enthusiasm and promises of fun, but somehow they failed to lift his spirits. He wondered if everything he was achieving truly satisfied him or if it was just a way to please others. Edward sat on the edge of the bed, lost in thought. The next day, after a night of insomnia and reflections, Edward decided to go out for some fresh air. He walked through the bustling streets of Chicago, his thoughts still heavy on his mind. The noise of the city and the rush of people around him seemed to amplify his state of mind. He wanted to find purpose, but the pressure felt overwhelming. It was then that he spotted Oliver, a homeless man who usually sat on a corner near the park. Edward had passed by several times but had never stopped to talk. As he approached, he noticed that Oliver had a deep, almost wise gaze that challenged appearances. "Good morning, young man," Oliver greeted, with a genuine smile that contrasted with the surrounding environment. "What brings a well-dressed young man like you around here?" Edward hesitated but decided to sit beside him. "I'm just thinking about life," he replied, a bit uncertain. Oliver observed Edward for a moment, as if assessing his soul. "Thinking is good, but sometimes we need to listen to the stories of others to understand our own." "You have a story, don't you?" "I do, but I don't know if it's interesting," Edward laughed nervously. "I'm an advertiser and I'm trying to figure out what I really want to do." "Advertiser, huh? You know, I once had a family. My children left me for money. They wanted more than I could offer. And in the end, what I had was more valuable than any amount of money," Oliver said, his voice laden with emotion. "Life is not about what you have, but about what you do with what you have." Oliver's words resonated deeply with Edward. He listened intently as the homeless man shared his memories and experiences. "I always thought success was having a good job, earning well, and being admired. But deep down, I feel empty," Edward confessed, sincerity taking over his voice. "Empty, you say? What really matters is love, the relationships we build, and the stories we leave behind. Have you ever stopped to think about the relationship you have with your parents? What do they expect from you?" Edward fell silent, absorbing the question. He had never considered how his parents' expectations shaped his own ambitions. "They want me to succeed, but what if what they consider success isn't what I want?" Oliver smiled, as if he had seen a glimpse of realization in Edward's eyes. "Life is yours, young man. Don't let others' expectations define who you are. Sometimes, what seems like a failure to some can be a triumph for others." Edward looked at the homeless man, feeling more connected to him than he had ever experienced before. "Do you really believe I can change my life?" "Of course. Change begins within you. And remember, no matter where you are now, there is always a way forward." The conversation with Oliver was like a breath of fresh air that Edward so desperately needed. He felt that the ties that bound him were beginning to unravel. The familiar pressure, the expectations, everything suddenly seemed clearer. He needed to find his own definition of success, and that meant confronting not only others but also himself. Edward and Emily arrived at a trendy party in Chicago that exuded the typical superficiality of New York elite social gatherings. The flashing lights illuminated the faces of influencers and aspiring celebrities, all competing for attention and status. As Edward observed the scene around him, a knot formed in his stomach. He felt like a fish out of water, submerged in a sea of empty conversations and rehearsed smiles. "Did you see that influencer? She has over 1 million followers on Instagram," Emily exclaimed, raising her phone to capture a moment that, for Edward, seemed more about appearances than real connections. He forced a smile and nodded, but the truth was that he felt increasingly distant from that superficial reality. "Yeah, I saw," he replied, trying to hide his disillusionment. "But what about the conversations? Don't you think we could have dialogues that are a bit more meaningful?" His voice carried a slight tone of frustration, but Emily, still focused on capturing the next perfect angle, ignored his unease. "Oh, Edward, stop being so serious. Life is a party, let's enjoy it. Look, I'm going to take a picture with her." And without waiting for a response, Emily drifted away, diving into the crowd, while Edward remained there, isolated. He watched groups of people squeeze into each other, exchanging words that felt more rehearsed than genuine. The sound of laughter and pulsating music filled the space, but he felt as if he were in an empty echo. On the way home that night, Edward was silent, his mind swirling with confused thoughts. What did he really want? What was he doing there? He picked up his phone and saw several messages from Emily, but instead of feeling excited, a wave of exhaustion washed over him. He threw himself onto the bed, feeling drained by a world that seemed to value only the surface of things. Why do I try so hard to please others, he thought, staring at the ceiling. The image of Oliver, the wise homeless man he had met the previous day, crossed his mind. He remembered their heartfelt conversation, the stories he shared about his life, about how he had been abandoned by his family in the pursuit of money, and how, in the end, none of it had truly brought happiness. The next morning, still with a foggy mind, Edward found himself again with Oliver, once more at the park where they had crossed paths before. The homeless man was sitting on a bench, watching the flow of people with a tranquil expression, as if he were observing life pass by without haste. "Good morning, young man." Oliver greeted him, with a smile that lit up his weathered face. "I see things aren't going so well, are they?" Edward sighed, sitting next to the man. "I think I'm starting to realize that things aren't as I thought. Yesterday, at a party, I felt so disconnected. People were so worried about image and what others thought. Oh, the image. An invisible prison that many put themselves in. You know, young man, I've seen many who have everything and still feel empty. What truly matters in life, after all, isn't what you have, but what you are and how you connect with others." Oliver spoke with a wisdom that seemed to have been earned in an emotional battlefield over the years. Edward felt his heart tighten. And how do I achieve that? How do I disconnect from this world that seems to value only the superficial? Start by listening. Listen to the stories of the people around you. Each one carries a world within themselves. And sometimes, those worlds are closer than you think. Look at them not as subjects of study, but as human beings, Oliver replied, with a deep and penetrating gaze. "I don't know if I can," Edward admitted, his vulnerability surfacing. "I'm so used to just following the norms, seeking approval, feeling accepted in groups that only care about status and fame. The first step is to free yourself from that need," Oliver said serenely. "And the next is to seek true connections. Look around you, young man. There are people who need someone who cares, who listens, who sees beyond the surface." Oliver's words echoed in Edward's mind as he returned home. He felt a growing desire to break free from the chains that bound him to a lifestyle that didn't satisfy him. Deep down, he knew that his relationship with Emily, no matter how intense it had been, was merely a reflection of the superficiality that surrounded him. It was time to make a decision. That night, while Emily was getting ready for another social outing, Edward decided he needed to open his heart. He found her sitting on the couch, lost in her phone, while social media occupied her mind. "Emily, can we talk for a minute?" he said, anxiety evident in his voice. "Sure, what's up?" she replied, not taking her eyes off the screen. "I've been feeling like we're living in different worlds. Our relationship isn't making me happy. I feel like we're more concerned about what others think than what truly matters to each other," Edward said, trying to articulate his thoughts. Emily looked surprised, but soon her expression turned defensive. "You're exaggerating, Edward. This is just a phase. Everyone does this. You can't just want things to be different." "But I do. I want something more meaningful, someone who cares about what's inside, not just the appearance. I don't want to live like this," he asserted, now more firmly. "So, you're saying you want to break up?" she asked, her voice rising, indignation evident. Yes, he replied, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. I can't keep myself chained to this superficiality. I need to find what truly matters to me. Emily fell silent for a moment, clearly hurt, but Edward had already made his decision. He felt a mix of sadness and relief as he realized that by freeing himself from that relationship, he was getting closer to himself and his true desires. That night, as the city pulsed outside, Edward sat on his bed, reflecting on what he had done. He knew the path ahead would be challenging, but at the same time, he felt lighter, as if he were finally allowing himself to be who he truly was, free from the chains of superficiality that had dominated his life until then. The encounter with Oliver had sown a new perspective in his soul, and he was determined to cultivate it. Edward woke up on a sunny morning in Chicago, sunlight filtering through the curtains of his room, and for the first time in a long while, he felt restless. The constant demands of work and family pressure weighed on his heart like an unbearable burden. He recalled the conversation he had at dinner the night before, where his mother, Amelia, praised a coworker, describing him as an example of success. If only you would try a little harder, Edward. Life is about choices, and now you need to make the right ones, she said, her voice echoing in his mind. Frustrated, Edward picked up his phone and saw messages from Emily, his girlfriend, inviting him to a social event. Another superficial party, he thought, as a wave of discouragement washed over him. He wondered if the achievements he sought truly satisfied him or if they were merely a way to please others. What did success mean to him? Doubts and insecurities followed him like shadows as he tried to prepare for the day. The next day, after a restless night, Edward decided he needed a change. He remembered Oliver, the homeless man he had met in the park, and driven by a desire for self-discovery, he decided to seek him out. Upon arriving at the park, he found Oliver sitting on a bench, with a serene look that seemed to understand the struggles of life. Edward approached, hesitant, but the presence of the homeless man was comforting. "Hi, Oliver," Edward said, forcing a smile. "Do you remember me?" "Of course, young man. Life has a way of crossing our paths when we need it most," Oliver replied, a glimmer in his eyes. "What brings you back here?" Edward hesitated before responding. "I'm struggling to understand what really matters in life. I feel like I'm always chasing after something I don't know what it is." Oliver nodded slowly, as if he had heard this story many times before. "Life is full of deceptions, Edward. Often, we lose ourselves in the pursuit of things that hold no value. What does success mean to you?" "Success? Well, I always thought it was about having a good job, making money, being recognized. But now, I don't know. It feels so empty," Edward admitted, frustration evident in his voice. Success is a word that molds itself to each of us. For many, it's a new car or a high position. For others, it might simply be finding peace of mind or making a difference in someone's life. What do you truly want? Oliver asked, his deep eyes fixed on Edward. Edward fell silent, reflecting. "I want to feel fulfilled, but I don't know how to do that. My family expects me to follow a specific path, and my girlfriend, well, she's more interested in parties than in deep conversations. The pressure from others can be suffocating, but remember, your life is yours. You are not a character in a script someone else wrote," Oliver said with a gentle smile. "Why not try something new? How about volunteering at a shelter? Helping others can give you a new perspective." The idea resonated with Edward like a distant echo of something he had always desired but never had the courage to do. "Do you really think that could help me?" he asked, a bit hesitantly. Sometimes, what we need the most is to step outside ourselves and look at the world around us. The stories you'll find there can change your life. Give it a try, Oliver suggested, with a wisdom that seemed to transcend his worn appearance. With a lighter heart, Edward said goodbye to Oliver and decided that afternoon, he would go to a local shelter. Upon arriving, he felt a bit out of place, observing the people around him. But as he introduced himself as a volunteer, the initial interactions were warm. The stories he heard from the people there were profound and touching, each carrying life lessons he could never have imagined. "Hi, my name is Edward," he said to a group of people sitting in a corner. "I'm here to help. What do you need?" An elderly woman with gray hair and a warm smile turned to him. "Hi, Edward. I'm Mary. We're thinking of doing an art exhibition with everyone's stories. Can you help us?" Edward felt a spark of excitement at hearing this. "Art? I'd love to help. How do you envision this?" Mary explained that the project was a way to give voice to each person's experiences, using art as a form of expression. "Many of us have stories that haven't been heard. Art can be a powerful way to share that," she said, her eyes shining. As he worked with Mary and the others, Edward realized the atmosphere was changing. He saw people opening up, sharing their experiences and transforming pain into beauty. What had once been a burden was now becoming a source of strength and reconnection. He remembered Oliver's words and felt he was finally finding a purpose. "You have an incredible talent for this, Edward," Mary praised, as they worked together decorating the space. "You truly believe in the importance of giving people a voice. I never thought this could be so rewarding. It makes me feel like I'm doing something that really matters," Edward replied, feeling more alive than ever. After a few weeks of working together, Mary and Edward were ready for the exhibition. On the day of the event, the shelter was filled with people, each bringing their stories, emotions, and works of art. Edward watched everything with a smile on his face, realizing how art had become a channel for healing and connection. "Do you see this, Edward? Look at how people are connecting. This is what art can do," Mary said, moved as she watched the people's reactions. "Yes, it's amazing. I never knew I could feel so fulfilled helping others express themselves," Edward replied, his voice full of gratitude. That day, Edward felt closer to his true self than ever before. He understood that the search for purpose was not just about what he could achieve but about how he could impact the lives of others in meaningful ways. With every piece of art displayed, every story told, he felt more aligned with what truly mattered. "Thank you for showing me this, Mary. I feel like I'm finally finding my way," Edward said as they both watched the visitors marvel at the works. "You are already on your path, Edward. You just needed a little courage to follow it," Mary replied, winking at him. With his heart full of hope and determination, Edward realized that his journey was just beginning. He was ready to explore new horizons and, most importantly, to reconnect with what truly mattered in life. Edward was increasingly dedicated to the community art project, a space that not only allowed for creative expression but also provided a sense of belonging and welcome for those who arrived there. He watched closely as life stories intertwined in the works created, each brushstroke and each line carrying a piece of the soul of those who made them. The shelter, which once seemed merely a physical refuge, had become a vital meeting point for creativity and emotional healing. One morning, while organizing materials for a new workshop, Edward was talking with Mary, the artist who had become his great ally in this project. She was a middle-aged woman with a deep gaze that seemed to reflect all her past experiences. "You know, Edward," she began, mixing paints on a palette, "art has this power to heal. It's as if each person brings their pains, joys, and hopes to the canvas. What we're doing here is much bigger than just painting." Edward nodded, absorbing her words. "It's true. I never thought art could have such a profound impact on people's lives. When I see the participants opening up, sharing their stories, I feel like I'm witnessing something sacred. Exactly, Mary replied, with a gentle smile. And you, Edward? What does all this mean to you? What do you hope to achieve with this project? Edward hesitated for a moment, reflecting on the question. He had let himself be carried away by the routine and the pressure he felt from his previous life, but now, alongside people who were truly seeking purpose, he began to question his own definition of success. I want to make a difference, you know. I always thought success was having a great job, making money, being recognized. But now I see that it doesn't bring true happiness. Mary looked at him with understanding. True success is about impact, Edward. It's about leaving a legacy in people's lives. What we're doing here is a start, but you can go even further. These words echoed in Edward's mind as he continued to work on the project. He began to imagine himself not just as an advertiser, but as a catalyst for change, someone who could use his skills to drive social causes and help the community. The idea of opening an advertising agency focused on social causes began to take shape in his mind. He wanted to use his experience in the advertising world, but now with a clear purpose, to make a difference. In the following weeks, Edward dedicated himself intensely to the project, organizing events, raising funds, and promoting the works of the participants. On a sunny day, he organized an exhibition at the shelter, where everyone could share their creations with the community. The energy in the air was palpable, and people gathered around the paintings and sculptures, admiring the authentic expressions of each artist. As people moved from one artwork to another, Edward stood in a corner observing. He saw a group of children laughing and pointing at a colorful painting depicting a radiant sun. Nearby, a middle-aged man spoke about his work, a sculpture made from recycled materials, explaining how each piece had a story behind it. The atmosphere was filled with joy and empathy, and Edward felt his heart warm. Edward! Mary's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Come see this. She drew him close to a large canvas, where a woman who had faced hardships was painting a mural. She is expressing everything she has felt over the years. It's amazing, isn't it? It really is, Edward replied, moved. Art truly is a powerful form of expression. I've never seen anything like it. After the event, as everyone dispersed, Edward talked with Mary about what he had learned. You know, Mary, I'm starting to see what it really means to be successful. It's not about money or status, but about the impact we leave on people's lives. Exactly, Edward, she said, with a proud smile. And you are doing it. You are inspiring others to express themselves and find their own paths. That is so much more valuable than any award or recognition. Mary's words lingered in Edward's mind. He realized that his old vision of success was crumbling and being replaced by something more meaningful. He began to sketch plans for his new agency, a space where he could combine his expertise in advertising with his desire to help others. He wanted to create campaigns that not only sold products but also told stories and promoted causes that truly mattered. That night, as he returned home, Edward felt lighter than ever. He had a new vision, a new purpose. Looking out the bus window, he saw the city illuminated, full of life and possibilities. He imagined how he could use his passion and skills to transform lives and bring to light the stories that needed to be told. I want to be an agent of change, he murmured to himself, determined to follow this path. He thought about how he could integrate what he had learned from Oliver, Mary, and the shelter participants into his new journey. As soon as he got home, Edward sat at the table, took a piece of paper, and began to jot down ideas for his agency. He wanted it to be a welcoming space where creativity could flourish, and the voices of the community could be heard. He envisioned campaigns that addressed social issues, that brought visibility to causes often forgotten. In that moment, Edward not only redefined what success meant for him, but also committed to following a path that reflected his values and aspirations. He knew the journey would be challenging, but he was prepared to face the obstacles that would come. He had found his purpose, and with it, a new meaning for his life. Edward took a deep breath, his heart racing as he prepared for the most challenging conversation of his life. Sitting at the dining table of his parents' home, the environment that once comforted him now felt suffocating, as if the four walls were closing in around him. The smell of dinner still lingered in the air, but he could barely pay attention to the food. His mother, Amelia, was beside him, arranging the cutlery with a precision that only heightened his anxiety. "We need to talk," he began, his voice trembling. "I've had some changes of heart about my career." Amelia looked at him, her eyes shining with a mix of curiosity and concern. "What happened, Edward? You know we are always here to support you, but you need to be realistic about your choices." "I know, Mom, but I want to open an advertising agency that focuses on social causes," he said, the words spilling out of his mouth faster than he intended. "I feel that working on something that really matters is more valuable than just following what society considers success." Amelia's expression changed instantly. "Social causes? Edward, that's not a viable career. Look at your colleague, John. He's an example of success, and you should be inspired by him. He's climbing the career ladder, while you want to make art?" "It's not art, Mom," Edward replied, trying to stay calm. "It's about helping people, making a difference. I don't want to be part of this cycle of superficiality anymore." James, his father, who had been silent until then, intervened. "Edward, you're throwing your career away. Your idealism is beautiful, but it doesn't pay the bills. You need to be practical. Have you thought about how you will support yourself? Your ideas are naive." Edward felt a wave of frustration. "What is success to you, then? Just being a cog in a machine that doesn't care about people? I don't want that for myself." "You're being dramatic, Edward," Amelia said, raising her voice. "We just want what's best for you. No one is saying you shouldn't help others, but that can't be your only priority. Life is about choices, and you need to make a sensible one." "I am making a sensible choice, Mom. I'm choosing to be happy, and that means doing something I love that positively impacts people's lives," he replied, his voice now firm. The tension in the room increased, and Edward could feel the weight of his parents' disapproval. He stood up, unable to bear the pressure any longer. "I'm sorry, but I can't continue this conversation. I need some time to think." With that, he left the house, feeling helpless and lost. The sun was still shining outside, but he couldn't feel its warmth. What should have been a supportive conversation quickly turned into a painful confrontation. He walked the streets of Chicago, trying to find a place where he could process his thoughts. After wandering for a few hours, Edward decided to look for Oliver, the homeless man he had met weeks ago who seemed to possess a peculiar wisdom. He found him sitting on a park bench, watching the frantic movement of the city. When Oliver spotted Edward, a smile lit up his wrinkled face. "Hello, young man. What brings you here today?" Oliver asked, his voice calm and welcoming. Edward hesitated but soon began to talk about the conversation with his parents and the pressure he felt. "I feel like I'm fighting against a system that doesn't understand what really matters. I just want to make a difference, but it seems like no one around me supports me." Oliver listened attentively, nodding in understanding. "Ah, my young friend, the pressure of society is heavy, but you must remember that what matters is your truth. You cannot allow others to define your worth. Life is short, and we must fill it with what truly makes us happy. Edward looked at the homeless man, admiring his serenity. But what if I fail? What if I can't support myself or feel fulfilled? Failure is part of the process. Every failure is a lesson in disguise, an opportunity to learn and grow. You need to find what ignites your soul. And believe me, when you follow your true passion, the universe conspires in your favor, Oliver replied, a glimmer in his eyes. The homeless man's words resonated deeply with Edward. He felt he was beginning to understand something fundamental about himself. So you believe I can do this? That I can really change my life and impact the lives of others? Yes, I believe. But remember, the path won't be easy. There will be people who won't understand your journey, but that shouldn't deter you. What you want to build is more important than the opinions of others, Oliver said. Edward smiled, feeling a great weight lift off his shoulders. He knew there was still much to face, especially regarding his parents, but now he felt a new determination. The conversation with Oliver had ignited a flame within him, and he was resolved to follow his heart. That night, as he walked back home, Edward reflected on all he had learned. He was ready to face his parents again, not to ask for permission but to explain his new vision and what he truly desired for his life. He knew it was time to claim his space and his voice. When he arrived home, the tension still hung in the air. He found his parents in the living room, speaking in hushed tones. "I'm sorry for leaving like that," he began, his voice calm. "But I really need you to listen to me. What I want to do isn't just a phase. It's something I feel in my heart." Amelia and James exchanged glances, and Edward could see the concern in their faces. "We're listening, Edward," Amelia said, her tone softer. "I want to open an advertising agency that helps social causes. I want to use my skills to make a difference, to help people in need. I don't want to be just a number in a company, I want to do something that really matters. Are you willing to give up security for this?" James questioned, concern evident in his voice. "Yes, I am. I'd rather take risks and pursue what makes me happy than live a life that doesn't resonate with who I am." "I hope you can understand that," Edward replied, his heart pounding in his chest. Amelia sighed, her expression softening. "We just want what's best for you, son. It's hard for us to accept that you want to follow such an uncertain path." "I understand, Mom. But if I don't try, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." "I need you to trust me," Edward said, the determination in his voice undeniable. The conversation continued, and although there was resistance, Edward felt that at least he was being heard. That night didn't bring an immediate resolution, but he knew he had taken the first step toward his freedom. He couldn't change his parents' opinions overnight, but he was determined to show them that it was possible to live according to his own values. He was ready to embrace his new journey, regardless of what others thought. Edward was nervous. After weeks of planning and hard work, the day of the launch of his new advertising agency had finally arrived. He was in a small office in downtown Chicago, a space he had transformed with vibrant colors and decor that reflected his new purpose, working on social causes. The walls were adorned with art from local artists, and the atmosphere exuded creativity and hope. He looked out the window and saw the hustle and bustle of the city. People hurried by, unaware of what was about to happen in that space. Edward took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He was about to do something he believed could change not only his life but the lives of many others. He turned to the table where his new collaborators were gathered. With a nervous smile, he began to speak. "Good morning, everyone. Today is a big day for all of us. We are here to launch our agency, which is not just a business but a mission. A mission to use advertising to make a positive impact on society, he said, trying to convey his excitement. The collaborators, a diverse group of creatives and dreamers, looked at him with anticipation. Among them was Jennifer, a graphic designer who had worked on various traditional advertising campaigns but was excited about the idea of using her skills for good. "Edward, it's amazing to see how you've turned this idea into reality. I've always dreamed of using my art for something that truly matters," she said, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Exactly, Jennifer. This is our chance to make a difference. And for that, we need new and bold ideas. Let's work together and build something special," Edward replied, feeling the positive energy in the air. The meeting continued with Edward presenting the agency's vision. He spoke about the importance of telling stories that resonate with people, inspire action, and highlight voices that are often ignored. He emphasized that the agency's success would not be measured solely in financial terms but by the social impact they could generate. "I want every campaign we create to have a purpose. If we don't touch people's hearts, we are failing," he explained, gesturing passionately. "We need to be authentic and true in everything we do." The collaborators were receptive and began to share their own ideas. Alejandro, an experienced advertiser, raised his hand and said, "What if we started our first project with a local NGO that helps vulnerable children? We could create a campaign to raise awareness and funds." "Great idea, Alejandro. Let's meet with them and understand how we can help in the best way possible. I believe we have a crucial role in bringing visibility to these causes," Edward responded, feeling increasingly inspired by the group's energy. After the meeting, Edward sat at his desk and began reviewing some documents. He was excited but also aware that challenges would come. Concerns about the agency's financial sustainability started to weigh on his mind. However, he remembered the words of Oliver, the wise homeless man he had met, who always said that the important thing was to follow the heart, even in the face of difficulties. The afternoon passed quickly, and Edward decided it was time to do something different. He wanted his team to feel connected to the agency's mission, so he organized a small event for everyone to get to know each other better and discuss their personal motivations for working there. He prepared a simple snack and invited everyone to sit in a circle. "I want each of us to share why we are here and what we hope to achieve with our work," Edward began, encouraging participation. "This will help us build a more united team focused on our goals." Jennifer was the first to speak. "I've always dreamed of being a designer, but I felt like I was just following a traditional path. Working here gives me the opportunity to use my creativity for something that truly matters. I want to help tell stories that can change lives," she said, her voice full of emotion. The others began to share their stories. Alejandro spoke about his desire to use advertising to promote social justice, while Isla, a copywriter, expressed her passion for writing about issues that are often overlooked by mainstream media. Edward listened attentively, and with each account, he felt his heart fill with hope. He realized he had formed a group of people with similar purposes, all eager to make a difference. "This is amazing, everyone. Together, we are stronger. Let's use our skills not just to create campaigns but to build communities and give voice to those who don't have one. I'm so happy we're all here," Edward concluded, feeling more confident than ever. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Edward and his team met with the NGO that Alejandro had suggested, and upon meeting the children and hearing their stories, the team felt even more motivated. They decided that the first campaign would not just be a fundraising drive but an initiative that showed the humanity behind the statistics. "We need to humanize these stories," Edward said in a brainstorming meeting. "Let's make videos that showcase the lives of these children, their dreams, and challenges. We want people to connect with them and see that they are much more than numbers." The team worked hard to create content that was authentic and moving. They spent hours recording testimonials, capturing laughter and tears, and portraying the reality of the children in a way that truly resonated with the audience. Meanwhile, Edward dedicated himself to seeking partnerships with influencers and brands that might be interested in supporting the cause. He was determined to make the campaign launch a success, and his nights were filled with calls and meetings. In one of those meetings, Edward met Olivia, a digital influencer known for her engagement in social causes. As he explained his vision, Olivia became immediately interested. "Edward, I would love to help. Your project is exactly the kind of thing I want to support. Let's do this together," she said, excited. With Olivia's support, things began to take shape. The campaign gained visibility on social media, and Edward saw his team rallying around a common goal. Everyone was committed to making a difference, and the atmosphere in the office was contagious. Finally, the campaign launch arrived. Edward was nervous but also filled with anticipation. He knew this was the beginning of something bigger. The children from the NGO were invited to the event, and he felt emotional seeing them smiling and having fun. On stage, Edward gave a speech that reflected everything he had learned throughout his journey. "Today, we are not just celebrating the launch of a campaign, we are celebrating the hope and strength of these children. Each one of you here has the power to make a difference. Let's change the narrative together and show the world that everyone deserves a chance," he said, his voice strong and full of emotion. Applause echoed through the room, and Edward felt that he was finally on the right path. He looked at his team, who supported him with smiles and expressions of pride. What had started as a dream had now become a reality, and he was determined to keep fighting for his convictions, driven by the support of his collaborators and the inspiring stories of the children he had met. The night ended with a performance by the children, who had a great time on stage, showcasing their artistic talents and spreading joy to everyone. Edward smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of a journey that would transform lives, including his own. Edward had thrown himself headfirst into his new life, now as the founder of an advertising agency focused on social causes. Enthusiasm pulsed through his veins as he dedicated himself to crafting campaigns that not only sold products but also promoted meaningful changes in society. Each day, he felt his connection to the community deepen, and that strengthened him. He had a purpose, something he had never felt before. On a sunny day, Edward organized an event to raise funds for a local shelter that helped homeless individuals. The idea was simple: an art exhibition showcasing works from community artists whose lives had been impacted by the economic crisis. He believed that art had the power to tell stories and, more importantly, to connect people. With a smile on his face, Edward walked through the event space, which was still being prepared. The white walls of the warehouse were being adorned with vibrant canvases and creative sculptures. "Edward, are you here?" called Mary, the artist he had met at the shelter. She came running, her hair tousled by the wind and a bag full of art supplies in her hands. "I hope you have a place for me to showcase my pieces. I'm so excited." "Of course, Mary. Your work is amazing and will be a crucial part of the event." "I'm so glad you're here," Edward replied, his contagious energy making Mary smile even more. "I brought some new things. I think they can touch people's hearts," she said, holding up a sculpture made of recycled objects. "Look, each piece tells a story." "I love that. Art really has this ability to connect people and remind us of what's important," Edward said, admiring the sculpture. "Let's find a special place to display it." As they organized the space, Edward began to notice the transformation happening around him. People were arriving, bringing not only their works but also their stories. Some were artists, others were supporters of the cause, and all were there with a common goal: to make a difference. He saw a group of young people gathering to discuss their experiences with art and how it had helped them face challenges in life. The energy was palpable. "Hi, you're Edward, right?" asked a gray-haired man who introduced himself as Harry, one of the shelter volunteers. "What you're doing here is amazing. Art can really change lives." "Thank you, Harry. I'm just trying to give a voice to those who need it. I believe everyone has a story to tell, and art is a powerful way to express them," Edward replied, feeling increasingly inspired. "You're right. I myself am an artist, and for years, art has helped me overcome tough times," Harry said as he looked at the works being displayed. "It's comforting to see so many people coming together for such a noble cause." The event began to take shape, and Edward felt more fulfilled than ever. He remembered Oliver, the wise homeless man he had met, and how his words had planted the seed of change in his life. Meeting him felt like a turning point, and now Edward was surrounded by people who were also seeking purpose. "What do you think about doing a live performance during the exhibition? It could be something that represents the struggles of the people we live with here," suggested Mary, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "That would be fantastic. Let's include that in the program." A live performance would bring an even more powerful dimension to the exhibition, Edward said, already thinking about how they could organize everything. That night, as the final details were being adjusted, Edward received a message from Oliver. It was simple but full of meaning: "True change comes from the heart. Never forget that." Edward smiled as he read the words, feeling more motivated than ever. The big day finally arrived. The doors of the warehouse opened, and a wave of people began to enter. Edward was at his best, wearing a simple shirt and jeans, but his smile lit up the room. He gave a brief presentation at the beginning of the event, talking about the importance of art and community. "We are here today to celebrate not only art but the life and stories that each of you carries. Each work displayed here represents a struggle, a victory, and a desire for change," he said, feeling the emotion take over. Applause echoed through the room, and Edward saw smiling, emotional faces. He felt fortunate to be in that place, surrounded by people who shared his vision. The artworks were exhibited, and stories began to be told. Some people shared their life experiences, and each account touched the hearts of those present. The atmosphere was filled with empathy and understanding, creating a sense of unity. During Mary's presentation, she spoke about how art had helped her express her pain and struggle. "Art is my voice. When I lost everything, I found in creativity a way to cope with the pain and loneliness," she said, tears in her eyes. "And that's why we are here today. To show that even in adversity, there is always hope." Edward watched as people reacted to the performance, some crying, others smiling. He realized that the event was not just a fundraiser but a celebration of life. He was creating a space where people could feel heard and valued. At the end of the night, as everyone gathered for a toast, Edward felt a wave of gratitude. He was surrounded by friends, volunteers, and artists who had become a fundamental part of his new journey. When he raised his glass, he not only celebrated the success of the event but also the transformation that was occurring in his own life. "I want to toast to all of you. Believing in change and the power of community is what unites us. Let's continue working together to make a difference," he said, and everyone responded enthusiastically, raising their glasses and shouting, "To change." In that moment, Edward realized he was exactly where he was meant to be. He had found his purpose and, more importantly, he had built a support network that inspired him to keep fighting for a better world. The past no longer defined him. Now, he was part of something greater, something that could positively impact many lives. And as he talked and laughed with those he now considered friends, Edward knew that his journey was just beginning. Edward had intensely dedicated himself to his new advertising agency, which stood out for its campaigns focused on social causes. However, over time, the reality of the market proved to be more challenging than he had imagined. The first few months were promising, with a warm reception from the community, but now he faced a dilemma that threatened not only the future of the agency but also his own belief in the possibilities of making a difference. On a cloudy morning, Edward prepared for a meeting with an investor who promised to bring the necessary capital to expand his operations. He remembered his conversations with Oliver about the importance of maintaining integrity in everything he did. "You must never let money lead you, Edward. What matters is the impact you can have on people's lives," the wise homeless man always said. And those words echoed in Edward's mind as he headed to the meeting. Upon entering the conference room, Edward was greeted by Michael, an investor known for his sharp eye for profit but with a questionable reputation. The atmosphere was formal, with a long, cold table between them, filled with documents and graphs promising attractive numbers, which Edward knew were only part of the story. "Edward, it's a pleasure to meet you in person," Michael began, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've been following your agency's work, and I'm impressed by the impact you've generated. But we need to be realistic here. You know social causes don't pay the bills, right?" Edward took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Yes, Michael, I understand. But I believe that by working with social causes, we can create real impact that, in the long run, can translate into a sustainable business model." Michael laughed, a sound that felt more like mockery. "Impact is a nice word, Edward, but the real world demands financial results. What you need to understand is that in this game, idealism doesn't pay salaries." Edward felt his heart race. He remembered the sleepless nights, the hard work he had put into the agency, and more importantly, the lives being touched by his campaigns. "I'm not here to put profit above people. I'm trying to change the narrative of what it means to be successful." "Then you must be prepared to fight," Michael said, changing his tone. "If you're not willing to adjust your vision, I suggest you consider a different business model. Something more profitable." Edward looked into Michael's eyes and, for a moment, saw an abyss of disinterest and coldness. He remembered Mary, the artist he had met at the shelter, and how art could transform lives. "I want to work with causes that truly matter, and I won't give that up. If you want to continue like this, fine. But don't expect me to support a business that has no future," Michael said, standing up and adjusting his blazer. "I think we're wrapping up the conversation here. Think carefully, Edward. What do you prefer, saving the world or saving your company?" Edward watched as Michael left the room, his heart heavy with doubt. Deep down, he knew the investor's words were not just a threat but a reflection of a reality that many faced. He sat down, feeling discouraged, as he thought about how he could continue fighting for his mission. In the following days, the pressure mounted. The agency's collaborators began to murmur about the future. During a meeting with his team, Edward decided to lay it all out. "Guys, I know things are tough. The numbers aren't adding up, and the pressure is rising. What do you think we should do?" The room was silent, and he could see the concern on his colleagues' faces. Isla, one of the designers who had always believed in Edward's vision, was the first to speak. "Edward, I know we're all here because we believe in what we're doing. But maybe we should consider some changes to attract investment." "What do you mean, Isla?" Edward asked, a bit defensively. "Maybe we should think about campaigns that generate more financial return. Something that can show clear and quick results," she suggested hesitantly. "But that's not what we want. That's not what we're fighting for here," Edward protested, but doubt began to creep into his mind. "We need to stay true to our mission." "I believe in our mission too," Isla said firmly. But we need to pay the bills. How do you imagine we're going to do that without a solid financial plan? Edward felt as if a storm was brewing inside him. He looked around the room and saw worried faces, the same anxiety he felt. I understand what you're saying, but I don't want to give up who we are. We're all with you, Edward, Henry, one of the copywriters, commented. We just want to ensure that the agency stays afloat and that we can keep doing what we love. The conversation continued, but Edward felt the pressure becoming unbearable. He left the meeting with a confused mind and a heavy heart. As he walked through the city, memories of his conversation with Oliver surfaced in his mind. The homeless man had taught him that value lay in human connections, in the stories people carried, not in cold numbers on a spreadsheet. Arriving home, Edward sat on the couch and picked up his phone, thinking about calling Mary. Maybe she has some ideas, he thought. But before he could dial, a text message from Emily popped up. Hey, love. Want to go to a party tonight? It's going to be amazing, you need to relax a bit. He hesitated. The idea of being at a party full of people who didn't really care about anything seemed disheartening. Emily, I'm really not in the mood. I need some time to think about a few things. Oh, come on. You're too tense. A party will do you good, she insisted, and Edward felt the weight of the pressure again. He remembered how often he let himself be swayed by others' expectations. Maybe she is right, he thought, but deep down, he knew he needed some time to reflect. That night, he decided not to go to the party. Instead, he picked up his journal and began to write. What does it really mean to be successful? He questioned in his notes. Is it having money? Is it being recognized? Or is it doing something that truly matters in people's lives? He spent hours writing, his words flowing like a catharsis. With each line, he felt lighter, as if he was freeing himself from the shackles that bound him. What he wanted was not just to be a successful advertiser, but an agent of change. Someone who could truly impact the lives of those around him. The next morning, Edward decided he needed to talk to Oliver again. He knew the homeless man had a unique perspective on the world and could help him see things from a new angle. As soon as he left his house, he felt a renewed urge to seek what truly mattered. Upon arriving at the shelter, Edward found Oliver sitting on a bench, watching the street's activity. Good morning, my friend. How are you? Edward asked, smiling. Good morning, young man. What brings you here today? Oliver replied, leaning forward with curiosity. I'm facing some challenges with the agency. The pressure is making me doubt my choices, Edward confessed, sitting down next to the homeless man. Oliver looked at him with an understanding gaze. Pressure can be a heavy burden, but remember, it's not what others expect of you that defines who you are. It's what you do with your choices. It's easy to say that, but what if I can't get what I need to keep the agency running? Edward questioned, frustration evident in his voice. Then you make a new choice, Oliver replied calmly. Sometimes, life gives us challenges so we can redefine our path. What do you truly want to do? What makes your heart sing? Edward hesitated, but looking into Oliver's eyes, a new determination began to rise. I want to impact people's lives. I want to do something that really matters. Then don't let the fear of failure hold you back. True success comes from following your passion and helping others. If you find yourself lost along the way, seek again what truly matters, Oliver said, giving him a pat on the shoulder. The conversation with Oliver ignited a flame within Edward. He realized that despite the financial difficulties, he could not give in to the pressure to change his vision. He needed to find a way to maintain his integrity while seeking creative ways to fund the agency. With this new perspective, Edward began to sketch ideas that could not only help his business survive but also grow in a way that reflected his values. That afternoon, Edward was in his apartment, with the afternoon light filtering through the curtains, creating a soft ambience that contrasted with the storm of emotions inside him. He had become a different man since his meeting with Oliver, and the life that once seemed so secure and structured was now crumbling into a sea of uncertainties. He sat down on the couch and looked at the bookshelf filled with books, many of which he had never read. The search for purpose had taken over his mind, and as he reflected on his past months, an idea struck him. He needed to better understand his own story, the roots of his ambitions and fears. It was then, while tidying up a bit, that he found an object he hadn't seen in years, an old journal, covered in dust. The cover was made of worn leather, with yellowed pages that seemed to have been written in a distant time. Edward hesitated for a moment, but curiosity won out. He opened the journal and found the delicate handwriting of his mother, Amelia. Each sentence seemed to pulse with emotions, dreams, and frustrations he never knew existed. The first pages spoke of her youthful dreams, of an idealized life as an artist. Amelia passionately described the feeling of freedom that art provided her, her desire to paint the world around her, to capture the beauty of life in every brushstroke. "I wanted to be free," she wrote, "but life led me down paths I never imagined. What is success, after all? Being accepted by society or following what I truly love?" Edward was frozen. He had always thought his mother felt fulfilled as a homemaker and mother, but now he saw there was a lifetime of unrealized desires hidden beneath the surface. He turned a few more pages and found notes about her internal struggles. "I feel like I am losing myself. With each passing day, the pressure to be what others expect of me becomes unbearable. My son deserves more than this. He deserves to know he can dream and follow his own dreams." With a heavy heart, Edward realized that the pressure he felt from his parents was, in a way, an echo of his mother's frustrations. What once seemed like an external demand now resonated as a cycle of fear and insecurity that perpetuated itself. He remembered all the times his mother spoke about her concerns for Edward's future, always comparing him to others, always emphasizing what was considered success. With a new perspective, he felt the need to confront her. Determined, Edward sought Amelia in the kitchen, where she was preparing dinner. The smell of herbs and spices filled the air, but the cozy atmosphere did little to calm his anxiety. He took a deep breath and called out, "Mom, can you stop for a moment? We need to talk." She turned, surprised by the seriousness in her son's voice. "Of course, Edward. What's wrong?" "I found your journal," he said, looking into her eyes. "And I read some of your notes." Amelia froze, her eyes widening in shock. "You read what?" "That's private, Edward." "Yes, I know, but I can't ignore what you wrote. You talked about your dreams, about how you felt trapped, and that made me think about everything I've been going through. The pressure you and Dad put on me." "Me? Edward, I just want the best for you. I always wanted you to have a better life than mine, to achieve the dreams I couldn't. But what is the best, Mom? Is it having a job that you considered suitable, or is it having the freedom to choose my own path? I don't want to live just to please others. I have dreams, and they are different from yours." Amelia looked down at the floor, pain evident on her face. "I didn't know you felt that way. I just wanted you to have security. I don't want you to go through what I went through. But you never let me know what you really wanted. I always thought your dream was for me to become a successful advertiser, and that's why I pushed myself so hard to get results. Now, I am changing, and that doesn't mean I don't love you or that I don't want your approval. I just want you to pursue your dreams too." She lifted her head, tears in her eyes. "You have no idea how much this touches me, Edward. I always thought I needed to be strong and that what I wanted didn't matter. But now, seeing you breaking free from the pressure, I realize I've lost the chance to be happy too." "Then let's do this together," Edward suggested with an encouraging smile. "Let's find out what we really want, without the pressure from each other. I want you to tell me about your dreams, and we can explore them together." Amelia hesitated, but the idea seemed appealing. "Do you really want this, son?" "Yes, I do. And I want you to know that it's okay to change. That you can be anything you want. You don't have to feel trapped by what society expects of you." She smiled, a shy but genuine smile. "You've always had such a Jennifer perspective on things, Edward. I'm so proud of you. Let's try then. Let's discover who we really are." Amelia's words echoed in Edward's mind for a long time. He realized that the connection they were forming was an important step in his journey of self-discovery. It wasn't just about him, it was about freeing his mother from the chains that kept her tied to a life she never wanted. They could support each other, and this new dynamic could be the beginning of something beautiful. Edward decided that not only would he follow his own path, but he would also encourage his parents to explore theirs. He wanted them to know that true happiness lay in being authentic, in accepting their weaknesses and vulnerabilities. He had already taken the first step. Now it was time for them all to walk toward the light together, leaving behind the shadows of pressure and expectations. The conversation with his mother not only freed him but also ignited a new flame of hope in his heart. He felt he was not alone on this journey. The love and support he had always sought were now present, and he was ready to face whatever came next. Edward was in his office, surrounded by his collaborators, when tension began to permeate the atmosphere. The team, composed of young idealists and creatives, was excited about the new project on the horizon, but a shadow loomed over them. There were rumors that one of the agency's investors was acting shady, manipulating information and harming social projects. This not only threatened the agency's future but also the credibility of everyone involved. "Edward, have you seen what's happening with the NGO Paths of Hope?" asked Jennifer, one of the designers on the team, her voice trembling. "It seems that the funds meant for them are being diverted." Edward frowned, his heart racing. "No, I haven't heard anything about that. What happened?" He stood up, sensing that something serious was at stake. "A group of investigators found out that our investor, Mr. Thomas, is behind this. He's diverting money to his own projects," said Pedro, the media planner, in a grim tone. "That's unacceptable," Edward replied, already mobilizing his mind. "We need to investigate this further. We can't let this happen in our name." As the team began discussing possibilities, Edward thought of Oliver. The wise homeless man who had changed his life was always present in his mind during moments of crisis. The connection Edward had with him was not just a memory, it was a guide that helped him navigate the turbulent waters of life. He decided he needed to find Oliver, as he might have insight on how to handle this situation. After several hours of intense discussion and planning, Edward left the office, determined to uncover the truth. He walked through the streets of Chicago, his mind buzzing with the information he had received. The city was alive, but to Edward, everything seemed a blur. He needed the clarity that Oliver always provided. Finally, he arrived at the shelter where Oliver was living. Upon entering, he was greeted by a wave of human warmth, laughter, and stories being shared. Edward spotted Oliver sitting in a corner, observing everything with a calm smile on his face. "Oliver!" Edward exclaimed, approaching him. "I need your help. I'm facing a huge problem at the agency, and I don't know what to do." "Calm down, young man," Oliver replied, his voice calm and deep. "Sit down and tell me what's happening." Edward sat down, taking a moment to breathe and organize his thoughts. "We're finding out that one of our investors is manipulating information and diverting money from social projects. This could ruin everything we've built." Oliver looked into Edward's eyes, and for a moment, the young man felt as if he was being read. "And what do you plan to do about it?" "I don't know," Edward admitted, distressed. "I want to expose the truth, but I'm scared of the consequences. What if this destroys our agency?" "Sometimes the truth is a dangerous path, but it's the only one worth taking," Oliver replied. "Remember, my young friend, strength comes from honesty and community. You are not alone on this path." Edward reflected on Oliver's words. He realized he had to act, not just for his agency but for all the people who depended on their work. With renewed purpose, he decided he would investigate even further and, if necessary, make the situation public. In the following days, Edward worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and proof of Mr. Thomas's actions. He spoke with people from the NGO, collected documents, and prepared for what was to come. However, what he didn't expect was for Oliver to become a key player in this story. One night, while reviewing documents at his desk, Edward received a message from Oliver. "We need to talk. Come meet me tomorrow at the park." The next day, Edward arrived at the park and found Oliver sitting on a bench, watching children play. "You won't believe what I found out," Oliver said as Edward sat down beside him. "Mr. Thomas is not just an investor, he has a dark past. He's been involved in corruption schemes before." "How do you know this?" Edward asked, intrigued. "I have my ways," Oliver replied with an enigmatic smile. "People always talk, and I always listen. He's playing a dangerous game, and you can use this to your advantage." Edward felt a wave of hope. "So, we can expose this?" "Yes, but with caution," Oliver warned. "The truth can be a powerful weapon, but it can also hurt those who wield it recklessly. You need to be smart about this." With the information Oliver provided, Edward returned to the office and prepared for the upcoming event. He decided to use the agency's next campaign to expose the investors' actions. The event would be a celebration of community art, where they would give voice to various stories of overcoming adversity. It was the perfect opportunity to bring the truth to light. Edward organized everything meticulously. He wanted the event to be a success, but also a moment of revelation. The team worked hard to ensure that the campaign was impactful and that the stories told were authentic and touching. On the day of the event, the atmosphere was electric. The shelter was decorated with artworks created by community members, and a crowd showed up to support the cause. Edward was nervous but determined. He knew this was the moment to make a difference. When it was time for Edward to give his speech, he positioned himself in front of the crowd, his heart pounding. He looked at the familiar faces of his team, Oliver and Mary, and took a deep breath. "Today we are here to celebrate art and resilience," Edward began, his voice echoing in the room. "But we are also here to talk about truth and transparency. Unfortunately, not everyone who has power uses it for good." He then started to reveal the information he had gathered about Mr. Thomas, exposing his story of corruption and manipulation. The room fell silent, people absorbing every word. When Edward mentioned Oliver and the help he had received, a murmur of surprise swept through the crowd. "We are here to say that the truth will always prevail," Edward concluded, his voice full of conviction. "And that together, as a community, we can overcome any obstacle." When he finished, the room erupted in applause. People were emotional, and Edward felt a wave of relief and satisfaction. But the climax of the event was still to come. At the end of the night, as people dispersed, Edward saw Mr. Thomas approaching, his face pale with anger. "You exposed yourself too much, Edward," he growled, his voice low and threatening. "This could ruin your career." "I'm no longer concerned about my career, Thomas," Edward replied firmly. "I'm concerned about the people you've harmed. The truth is now out in the open." The moment Edward turned, Oliver appeared by his side, a calm smile on his lips. "You did what was right, my young friend. True strength comes from honesty and community. Never forget that." The revelation of the truth not only strengthened Edward's agency but also united the community around a common purpose. People began to mobilize, and support for social projects grew exponentially. From that day on, Edward not only became an advocate for social causes but also a symbol of hope and change. He realized that his journey of self-discovery was just beginning, and that with the help of people like Oliver and Mary, he could continue to positively impact the lives of many. And so, amidst challenges and triumphs, Edward found not just a new professional path but also a new sense of purpose, reaffirming that the true wealth of life lies in the connections we make and the stories we share.